the King of France, the Emperor of France, sought to gain control over England because there was a difference of opinion. Knights were fighting against the king, the people were happy, but the king was trying to fight against the knights. So the king, with any outside battle coming in, it would have been very hard for him to fight. So the King of France brought his knights and they started to fight to take over England at that point in the 11th century. Now, there's a chronicler, basically a recorder of events, and his name was Orderic Vitalis. Orderic Vitalis certainly wrote about all of these tumultuous times, these times that were ravaged with crime, with war, with bloody conflicts that knights continued to put on, causing disruptive violence from person to person to person. Well, once the King of England started to enforce those laws upon the knights, Orderic Vitalis quickly praised the king. He was very happy. Orderic Vitalis was an Englishman himself, so he was happy to see this justice come forth from the king. However, there was a particular knight, and his name is Robert of Bellamy. Now, Robert of Bellamy was one of these knights that was not happy with these restrictions. He was not happy with not having the freedom that he once had. And so he fought against his neighbors. He fought against the king's knights. And through this process, Orderic Vitalis specifically mentions of Robert of Bellamy. He says that he has great character. He has his ability of the enterprise of the field, his ability to fight with weapons, to kill other knights, his ways to control battles is certainly above any other knights. However, he says that all of these wonderful deeds are marred completely by the fact that Robert of Bellamy is fighting against his countrymen, that is fighting against the king, causing these problems. To the point that when the King of France comes in with his knights and his army, that Robert of Bellamy joins up with the King of France and continues fighting against the King of England. And certainly, with this accounting, we can look at Robert of Bellamy as the classic offending knight. So we certainly do have credible evidence that knights were a cause of this disruptive violence in medieval society. So when you start to think about why we no longer see knights on the battlefield, it was not only because of the advance of guns, it's not only because of the advance of gunpowder and different other weapons, but it was also a part that they were a problem, they were a source of the problem of society at that particular time. So let's get on to the next subject. And what we're going to be covering is public order in the 12th century. Now, in the 12th century, as we move forward, King Philip, he was not restricting his knights. However, his son, I'm going to remember his name right before I look at it here. Let's see here. Louis Le Gros, his son Louis Le Gros in the 12th century, started to police his knights. He started to come up and tell knights that they could no longer have the freedoms that they once had. Now, the King of England, King Henry, only did so, he only extended his arm as far as he could. But Louis Le Gros is French for the fat, and we'll find out why in a moment. But Louis Le Gros, he went so far as to travel with his army to any offending knight. To any knight that was causing this disruptive violence, he would travel out to and he would fight against it. So much to the point that eventually, when you heard enough knights were causing a lot of problems, you would find out what castle they were stationed at, what castle they came from. Louis Le Gros, he charged his army against these castles, and he tore these castles down. These castles that were a center for the spread of these problematic knights. Now, there was one individual in particular called Thomas Morrow. Now, Thomas Morrow was an evil knight, if we can find any point of indication of knights being evil. Thomas Morrow would kill clergymen, he would kill religious leaders, he would tear down their churches, he would kill commoners, he would take whatever he wanted, he would pillage and steal and plunder as much as was his ability. The only one that could enforce any laws upon him was the king, Louis le Gros. Now remember, we had talked about what violence is allowable and what violence is not allowable. Well, getting into the 12th century, you started to have to get permission from the king, or you could get permission from the church to wage a battle, or a series of battles, a war. Louis le Gros wanted to hunt down Thomas Morrow for his horrid crimes that he had committed, but he could not just do so on his own accord. He actually got permission from the Pope, from the church, to wage this battle. So Louis le Gros went out on a campaign, tracked down Thomas Morrow, captured him, and Thomas Morrow told Louis le Gros, he said, you know what? He said, look, I've done a lot of bad things, I've killed a lot of people. How much is my freedom worth to you? We're used to ransoming people, so how much is my freedom worth? Louis le Gros told him that figure, and Thomas Morrow, having the money, having the funds, said, here you go. And he was free to go. Sadly, Thomas Morrow very quickly went back to his old ways. He'd just given up all the money that he stole and took, so he needed more money. So he went back to his old ways. At this point, Louis le Gros, in his older years, Louis the Fat, was now too fat to actually mount a horse. I told you it would come back around eventually. And so he sent his army to capture Thomas Morrow. They captured Thomas Morrow, and through that process, Thomas Morrow was captured, and he died living in a prison cell. So certainly, justice did have an arm, and that was the king. It wasn't church, it wasn't the church, it wasn't knights, but it was the king, because ultimately the king decided what went and what did not go on. That is another reason why we don't call it the feudal system, but rather we use the term a tyrannical construct. When I say tyrannical, what sort of an idea comes into your mind? Anybody? Tyranny. Okay, and what's tyranny? Basically one man ruling how he wants to, right? Basically forcing all of his ways upon everybody else. Well, that's how the kings ruled. Kings got to make whatever laws they wanted. Okay? So right now we're going to break for lunch, and we'll get